cheating wife who abandoned me during my hospitalization now seeks forgiveness after 12 long years. Hi, I'm Jason, 47, and I want to share my life story here to get some advice. This goes back to 12 years ago when I was married to Susan, my first wife. We were married for 7 years and had two children, Laura and Lucas, who were 5 and 3 at the time. We were leading a regular life until one fateful day. One morning, while I was driving to my office, a speeding vehicle from the opposite direction rammed into my car. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital bed covered in bandages and plasters. The nurse informed me that I had woken up after 2 days in a coma. I held my doctor's hand and thanked him for saving my life. I was grateful to be alive, but little did I know about the disaster that was about to unfold. After a week of treatment, my doctor informed me that my lower body was paralyzed and that I might never be able to walk again. I was shattered. Susan broke down at this news, and it was evidently difficult for her because she had to manage the house and the children in all aspects. I fell into depression, unable to comprehend my life in a wheelchair. I spent my days staring at the empty walls of my hospital room, cursing how my life had turned upside down. I dreaded how I would never be able to play soccer with my children, how I would never be able to dance with my wife, and how I would never be able to be free again. To make things worse, Susan stopped visiting me in the initial days of my stay. She brought the children 3 times a week, and the moments I spent with my family were the only ones I lived for. But as the days passed, her visits became scarcer. I pleaded with her to bring the children to see me, but she would say that they didn't want to meet me so often. I felt hopeless. Then, one day, she handed me divorce papers saying, "I definitely can't spend my life with a handicapped man. I'm still young and desirable. I deserve a normal man." I would be lying if I said I didn't sense that coming. I had a feeling that separation was on the horizon when she started giving me the cold shoulder, but I didn't expect it to happen so soon, only a month after my accident. Some of my friends informed me that they had seen Susan loitering around, hand in hand with a middle-aged man, probably someone in his 50s, in cafes and malls during the evenings and on weekends. Some claimed that she had been having an affair even before my accident, and others said her desperation led her to a fat, grumpy old man after my accident. It was barely 2 months after my accident, and I was still hospitalized when I was handed divorce papers. I might sound calm while writing this, but back then, I was flustered, devastated, and heartbroken. I was wheelchair-bound, destitute, and divorced, with no income or savings after paying for household expenses and the children's education. Saving money had been off the radar. Luckily, I had insurance that covered my hospital bills to some extent, but I had to liquidate my savings for the remaining expenses. In the end, I was left with nothing. I wanted to yell, smack my head against the wall, and curse my fate. I don't know how I held it together back then, but something inside me kept me sane, probably the fire of revenge. After being discharged, I moved to my parents' house. I was 35, divorced, with no income, and dependent on my 62-year-old mother, who was a florist. She ran a small shop in the suburbs. The little income from the shop and her pension kept her expenses afloat. With those limited resources, she offered to support me. It was the most troubling feeling for a 35-year-old man to depend on his mother. Soon after my discharge, I went to meet my children. When I reached my house, it was locked. The neighbors told me that Susan had moved into her lover's house with the children. According to the neighbors, Susan's lover was a fat old man who had been divorced 3 times but was filthy rich and had no children. Some even labeled Susan a gold digger and a cheapster for sleeping with a grumpy old man for his fortune. I managed to get the address of her boyfriend and reached his house. When I arrived at Susan's new home, she wouldn't let me see my children, saying they had already adjusted to her boyfriend and apparently called him daddy. She said my sudden appearance would confuse them further. She threatened me with a restraining order if I insisted on seeing my children. I didn't have a penny to spend on a lawyer. I was surviving on my mother's meager income, so I backed off. It was less than 6 months after my accident and only a few months after my divorce. She was already living with a man. I felt disgusted. I asked her how she could abandon me and move on so quickly. Immature, I know, but I was a helpless, wheelchair-bound father. What else could I do? I pleaded with her for at least one chance to prove my worth. She belittled me, saying that I was a burden in her life. I asked her if she had cheated on me before the divorce, because our divorce was finalized a month ago and she was already living with her lover. She shooed me away, saying that it was none of my business and that I should never show my ugly face to her again. I kept staring at her, contemplating my 7 years of married life with that woman who replaced me with another man in just a few months. I left the place with tears in my eyes, defeated by the humiliation. I cried like a 5-year-old in front of my mother, who consoled me and motivated me to take charge of my life. I was clueless about my future. I was directionless at the time. I joined my mother in her shop. I helped her make bouquets, serve customers, and clean the shop. Soon, I realized that the business had huge potential to grow, but my mother was too fragile to do it herself. I pulled out my old contacts to secure contracts with event management companies to supply flowers at events. Gradually, I built a team and took contracts for venue decorations. Eventually, I launched my own event management company. It took me 12 long years to rebuild my life. Throughout it all, my mother had my back. She supported me and motivated me to bounce back. A year after my accident, I learned that Susan was leaving the city with my children and her lover. I rushed to the house to meet my children, but they had already left by the time I arrived. I had tried to reach out to them multiple times, but Susan insulted me and chased me away every time. Susan had full custody of the children, and she could decide everything for them. Since I was physically and financially challenged, I couldn't contest joint custody. I couldn't challenge her restraining order because I was too broke to hire a lawyer, whereas Susan had a wealthy boyfriend, Evan. I didn't know if Evan had already been in Susan's life before my accident or if he appeared suddenly after the accident. All I knew was that he was a wealthy man with ample ancestral property. In the last 12 years, whenever I got any leads on my children, I traveled to meet them, but failed every time. Susan threatened to have me arrested, as her boyfriend had the money and contacts to get away with anything. By the time I filed for joint custody, I had finally managed to stabilize my event management business. I hired a good lawyer, and I was awarded 15 days of visitation rights. My children, now 17 and 15, were asked if they wanted to meet me, and they confirmed that they did. Although I know I can't compensate for the lost 12 years, I hope to spend quality time with them. As the time approaches, I feel both nervous and excited. Understand me and come to terms with the truth gave me a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I knew it wasn't easy for them, but the fact that they were beginning to see things from my perspective was a small but significant victory. It was as though I could finally breathe again, knowing that the years of pain and sacrifice weren't for nothing. As the days passed, I tried to make up for the lost time with my kids. We spent evenings together, talking, laughing, and trying to heal the scars that had formed over the years. They began to open up about their own struggles, their frustrations, and their dreams. I was there for them in ways I had never been before, and slowly, our relationship evolved into something stronger, more honest. But despite these efforts, the lingering tension with my family remained. My mother, who had chosen her new life over mine, refused to acknowledge her role in what had happened. She continued to demand things from me, expecting me to act as if nothing had changed. It was a constant struggle to balance the desire for reconciliation with the reality of her toxic behavior. The more I tried to set boundaries, the more she pushed against them. At one point, she even tried to manipulate me into paying for her medical bills, using guilt and threats to get what she wanted. It was in those moments that I realized just how much power she still had over me, and how much I had to break free from that power. I knew I had to make a choice. Either continue to let her control my life or fully embrace my own freedom, even if it meant severing ties for good. It was a difficult decision, but eventually I chose myself. The first step was cutting off financial support. It wasn't easy. I knew it would cause a rift that might never heal, but it was necessary for my own well-being. The next step was establishing boundaries, clear ones, and sticking to them no matter what. I began to distance myself emotionally, refusing to let her guilt trips or manipulation tactics pull me back into the chaos of the past. It wasn't a decision made in haste, and there were moments of doubt. But as time passed, I grew stronger. I started to see my own worth again, independent of the toxic family dynamics that had defined so much of my life. It wasn't just about moving out or cutting ties with my mother. It was about reclaiming my own identity, my own sense of peace, and the future I deserved. It was a journey of self-discovery, one where I learned that sometimes, in order to heal, you have to let go of the people who caused you the most pain, no matter how deeply you once loved them. Now, as I stand at the threshold of a new chapter in my life, I realize that the past, with all its heartbreak, was a necessary part of the journey. It shaped me, but it doesn't define me. And for the first time in years, I'm truly excited about the future.